want to see the.
I know. He asked me about it, and I'm like, I don't know where it is. So
It's up.
it's funny when you said my husband, I thought, no, he passed away. No, I have a new one.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I think I was thinking about that because of what Kay said. Even if you're not old and somebody passes away unexpectedly, there's a lot of stuff they didn't have a chance to tell you.
Right.
But anyway, yes, we are recording. And he just heard that when he listens. But he's going to talk, he's got some really cool stuff about how to think about goals in life. And so I think we'll stop, and then he's going to talk about being present to the thing in front of you, and how Jesus was very much always present to the thing in front of him. And so I'm going to stop in the middle. We'll talk about goals, and then we'll go to the last section, because I think there's some good points in both sections. So with that said, let me share my screen. And it's here. Okay.
When we read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for what they are, biographies of the life of Jesus Christ, we can see at least 7 timeless time management principles from the life of Christ. And that's what we're looking at in this series. In session 1, we looked at principle number 1. Jesus started with the word. In the last session, we looked at principles number 2 and 3. Let your yes be yes, and dissent from the kingdom of noise. In this session, we're going to tackle principles number 4 and 5, prioritizing our yeses and accepting our uni-presence. Let's start with prioritizing our yeses. If you go read Mark chapter 1, there's a fascinating scene where Jesus is having a crazy busy day. He's healing people left and right. He's healing Peter's mother-in-law, and then all of the people from the town come and ask for healing. He spends all night healing the people in the village. Everyone goes to sleep. They wake up the next morning, and Jesus is starting with the word. See principle number 1. He's holed away, spending time with his Father. When the disciples come up to him and say, Jesus, everybody's back. They want an encore of healing on day 2. And Jesus says, no. He said, let us go to the nearby villages so that I can preach there, for this is why I have come. In other words, Jesus didn't say yes to everything on his to-do list. He prioritized his to-do list. He took the long list of things he could do, whittled it down to the things that he thought he should do in order to finish the work the Father gave him to do. If we want to redeem our time in the model of our Redeemer, we've got to prioritize our yeses. We've got to prioritize our to-do lists. But how? I like to use this metaphorical 5-story building to understand this, because we've all heard of different tools, quarterly goals, big, hairy, audacious goals, mission, calling, whatever. How does all of this fit together? Maybe this image will be helpful to you. Let's start at the very top floor. Imagine a 5-story building, an apartment complex, a hotel, whatever. And on the 5th floor, the top floor, is your mission in life. And here's the good news. There's tons of books out there about defining the mission for your life. I'm gonna let you off the hook. You don't have to read a single one. You don't get to choose your mission because you didn't create yourself. Your Creator created you with a mission, and it's simply His glory. Period. Full stop. The mission of your life is to glorify God in all that you do. See 1 Corinthians 10:31. That's your mission. Now, if you take the elevator in our metaphorical building down to the 4th floor, now we've got some choice. Now we've got some agency, because here on the 4th floor, we're talking about calling. These are the specific lanes that you're gonna run after in order to bring glory to your Father. So for me personally, I've defined 3 callings for my life. I am a husband to Kara, I'm a father to Ellis and Kate and Emery, and I'm an entrepreneur, specifically leading my team at Jordan Rayner and Company. Next, if you go from the 4th to the 3rd level, that's where we have our long-term goals. And I'm gonna come back to that in a minute, so I'm gonna skip quickly to level 2, which are quarterly goals that help you make progress towards your long-term goals for each of your callings. Then on the 1st floor, the ground level of this 5-story building, you have your projects and actions, your tactical day-to-day to-do list. And then there is a 6th floor of this building, but it doesn't deserve to be called a floor. It's the basement. It's what I call your posteriorities, your avoid at all cost list until everything above the ground, all your priorities are accomplished. Okay, I promised that we were gonna come back to level 3 of this metaphorical building, because if there's one really practical thing I want you to walk away from with this particular principle, it's this: the practice of setting epic long-term goals. A couple of my personal big, hairy, audacious long-term goals. So with my kids, my big, epic long-term goal is that they would leave the house being fully engaged in God's mission for the world. Professionally, I got a big goal of selling 1 million books over the next 4 years. Now you may be asking, Jordan, why does this matter? Why does it matter that I set big, hairy, audacious long-term goals? Number 1, we know that God has the power to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine in our lives and work. See Ephesians 3:20. Our goals are so small compared to what we know that God can do working in and through his people in this world. Number 2, bigger goals are paradoxically easier to achieve than smaller goals. Everybody sets average goals, so ironically, the level of competition decreases as the size of your goal increases. Number 3, the bigger your goal, the easier it is to say no. When I talk to friends who are having trouble saying no to things on their calendars and their to-do lists, my first question is always, what's the big, hairy, audacious goal that you've said yes to? Because if there's something big enough and inspiring enough that's captivating your imagination that you're working towards, everything else looks small in comparison. Those are just 3 reasons to set bigger, longer-term goals. They help us prioritize our yeses and focus on the work God gave us to do. Okay, that's principle number 4. Prioritize your yeses. Let's
talk for a minute about that one before we jump into the next one, because there was a lot of content in there. So let's start with the first thing that he said, that our mission, every one of us, is to glorify God. Thoughts? Do we have violent agreement or thoughts on that?
Well, it reminds me of the Westminster Shorter Catechism, to glorify God and enjoy him forever. That's the number 1 thing.
It reminds me of the first commandment.
I just thought it was real. I mean, intuitively, I think we all know that, but to have him say that, I thought it was really cool.
Well, I'm not certain what he's saying, to tell you the truth. I mean, I have no argument with him, but glorify as a verb is so amorphous that I'm not confident that anything I've ever done has glorified God. I just don't know what it means. I've tried to be a good person and do good things, but pretty presumptuous of a mere mortal to go around saying glorifying God. So I would appreciate some elaboration on what the term means to you. I don't mean to be difficult, but that's where I am.
I am on the same wavelength as you, Paul, but I think it's because I want instruction, right? I want like here's what that means. But that's just me.
Job description would be kind of handy.
Think of
Hi,
it.
this is, oh,
Go ahead, Carol.
well, this is Mary.
There you go.
And that's okay. I just wanted to say, I don't know that I'm sitting on a street corner shouting, glory to God, but the little things that we do, whether it's, volunteering at Vacation Bible School to be with those kids, I think that's glorifying God. Taking time with a friend who is hurting, to listen to them and perhaps, ask for God's guidance in our words with them. Our prayers glorify God. So anyhow, that's kind of what it means to me. So I may be completely off. Well, no, I don't feel like I'm off base, but to me, that's what it is.
Found it interesting that the two people who were seeking a definition was one is a professor and the other one is a retired professor. That really struck me. So,
The meaning of words is important.
well, and you're right. You're right.
Well, I think it's particular, I taught for 40 years at a Presbyterian college. And I mean, it wasn't very Presbyterian, but it was historically Presbyterian. and I'm a Presbyterian, which was more or less coincidental, but it mattered to me. And I'll even go so far as say, McAllister was Presbyterian enough by tradition that when they hired a new professor, they would issue a press release saying Professor X has been called to, you weren't just hired, you were called, which is a term I treasure. So it's a very meaningful inquiry that I'm trying to launch, because the life of the college professor is in the modern secular world is it's hard to fit into when I'm being loving to my grandchildren, I know I'm doing the right thing, but day to day as a college teacher, I don't know. I don't know what Amy feels, but that's
I don't know. I get called to the. Go ahead, Amy.
I was just like, well, I think that you were glorifying God by all your interactions with your college students. I'm sure they were inspired by whatever you were teaching them, whether they acknowledged it to you or not.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
I'll throw one out there. I feel like it's showing others that faith in God works.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly it's by example, it's by how you live.
Yeah, I think in the Bible passage, always be ready to give an answer for the reason for your joy. But like Paul, one of the things that I was taught years ago is if you see somebody using their charisms, you should affirm them, because your charisms are your unique gifts from God. And when you so Paul and I are on the profile committee, we met Sunday, and there's still some work to be done. And Katie and I are co-leading, and we had asked folks to, give us input if we can. And Paul sent this note with the most thoughtful and wise input, and spent the time finding pictures. And I know you put a lot of time into that. And it was it lifted such a huge weight off my shoulders. I will tell you that. And I was just like, okay, this is all wonderful. This is so easy for me, the task person, to just put it in the deck and then get it all updated. And to me, that was glorifying God, because you were moving. You said, I saw your plea. I heard your plea. And that to me was glorifying God. You heard somebody and you said, I can do this, and I'm going to give that to them.
Well, thank you. I take the point.
Well, one of the, am I less blurry now in terms of my voice?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind when Paul says he's not sure is that I knew the most when I was in the 9th grade. And by the time I was in the 10th grade, I thought, boy, was that dumb. When I was in the 9th grade, I thought, okay, if I just keep working at it, I'll know a lot by the time I'm an adult. And by the time I was beginning to be more on the cusp of actually being an adult, I realized, life is so complicated. And I think if part of why we're not sure is because it's not something that's 10 points and everything. I mean, there are the 10 commandments, but the 10 commandments are a guideline. They're not an end point. And I think that's part of why I like being here tonight. It's a search.
Something that just hit me is maybe that's why, one of the reasons why we're called to start the day in the Word and to ask God, how do you want me to glorify you today? And to get fueled to glorify him.
Well, I think I completely agree with you. I think for me, it's the way I think about it is being oriented. Because it's very easy to get caught up in the demands or and not just like work demands, but also demands for my attention and all kinds of things. So being, if I start that way and also in that way, it's I'm finding it very helpful in kind of starting off and ending. If I don't do both, I feel like I'm not as grounded, if that makes sense.
Beautiful, yes. Thank you for sharing. Okay, well, just in the interest of time, I want to move on to the next point, because I thought some of these, I just think every one of these needs time with God to unpack. But the calling, what did he call it? Did he say it was our calling? Was that let me look at my notes.
Our callings.
Okay, your calling. So what did you think of that notion?
I think it's hard to know exactly sometimes exactly what your calling is. I don't know.
Well, but he's making the point that he believes that those 3 callings he identified are coming from God, from emptying himself out and paying attention.
I think the first 2 were pretty obvious, husband or wife, mother or father. Not everyone has both those callings or either of those callings on their life. I think for me, it was kind of puzzling, and I believe it changes at stages in life. But it was what's my calling beyond being now? And I really do feel like getting remarried was just like, oh my gosh, that's a new calling again on my life. It's a bigger commitment. But beyond those 2, I had to give pause. I haven't really thought about what if there is a third one and what it is. So I felt like today was, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. I felt like that was a question I need to take to prayer time.
I think I was going to say, sometimes I think it's puzzling, or you're just not certain because maybe you think your calling should be what somebody else's is. And so then when you're doing maybe your calling, you maybe think this calling isn't good enough or something. I don't know. Because it's not, I don't know, what the typical calling would be, I guess.
Well, that's funny because last night I do a study in my neighborhood, and the thing was comparisons are never from God. Like as soon as you're doing that, that's destructive. My calling isn't as good as her calling,
Mhm.
you know, but we do that, of course. Does anybody feel like they know what their calling is?
I think there have been times in my life when I've been more sure of what my calling is than others. And I think that changes as you go through life. And sometimes I think you're more sure of where you're at than other times.
I agree with that, Kim. I'll give an example. A few years ago, I literally got a call, like an actual call, like a phone call.
Was it a call from God?
Well, no, it was from Gary
You wish.
Franklin. He was close to God. So it was from one of our co-senior wardens at the time to invite me to consider joining our search committee at the time. And I've had moments in my life where something like this happened, where I really, really felt like this is a call. This is important. This is something that is not something I would have ever gone and, that it would have ever occurred to me to go volunteer for. At the time, I wasn't even that active at St. Luke's. I was really drifting. And I knew at the end of that conversation that it was a very important thing for me to pay attention to, pray about. And so that was definitely a calling. And I've had experiences like that in other, like I said, where you just know. In this season of my life, whatever it is, I am being called to do this. And I dare not ignore it. So I think if we reflect, each of us can come up with those moments where something outside of ourselves was grabbing a hold of us and saying, you are needed. I need you. You are needed to do this, whatever it is.
That's beautiful. Anyone else have a similar experience? Well, I will share something that I've said, and I'm almost afraid to say it out loud because I'm afraid if I articulate it, God's going to make it bigger. And I'm not ready for bigger yet. But for me, I know it's a calling from God. That's what it is. Having lived through at the age of 55 losing my husband, and just was just everything you have to go through. And I feel like God has put a call on my life, and it's only been 2 people so far, but to really be there for other women who are going through that. And one is a woman that I know from St. Thomas More, and we actually had her 80th birthday party here on Saturday night. She's estranged from one of her kids, semi-estranged from another, and God just brought us together. And I know that's his call on my life, is to be there for her. And then just about a week ago, I had sent a note to Mariana, and I said, hey, let me know if you want to talk about this. she called, we talked for like an hour, and it was just about nothing and everything. And I just feel like, you know, that somehow that's a calling to use that experience to help other people who are going through that very painful and horrible experience. But I don't want them to make it any bigger yet. Something has to fall off my list.
But I guess what I want to say to you, Maria, is by responding with a yes to these what may seem like smaller things, you are, by saying yes, giving your gifts in service to other people, glorifying God. That is the definition.
I know that callings can be a challenge, but I must say, I find myself envying those that feel confident that they have a calling. I'll give you an example of my brother-in-law, Charles, is a retired Disciples of Christ minister. And he also worked for many years as a counselor. He has a degree in counseling. And now that he's retired, he runs, I don't know what you'd call it, a cell. He runs a group for family members of people who have severe dementia, helping them cope. And I think it's a real body of work to do that. And it places a lot of demands on him, both in terms of time and just emotional stress. But I can't help thinking about how lucky he is that he has that. Here he is in his mid-80s, and he's still doing the work of the Lord, to put it in the most obvious terms. And how lucky he is to have that calling. We should all be so lucky.
Carol, you were saying something?
No, I was agreeing with the fact that what his brother-in-law, you said your brother-in-law?
Yeah.
Yeah, is doing is very, very important, because I have a very dear friend with Alzheimer's, and I know that her husband and her daughter both have gone to those groups, and I know how much it has helped them. So that is very, very important. So thank him for me.
In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the rest of the video, but what I would really encourage, I just feel like each one of these sessions has so much to unpack. And so, like, to think about, you know, to take to prayer, where is God calling you? And then also the whole thing, and I'll just ask one question to see if anybody has this, because the next level was set big, hairy, audacious goals. And I thought, well, I really have to sit and spend time thinking about that. But does anybody have like a big, hairy, audacious goal?
I'm big and hairy, but that's all I can say.
I could say I have an audacious goal to be a good grandmother, but that requires one of my kids doing something first. So can't do that yet. So, okay, we'll listen to the next one, because I think there's some really good content in this next one too, but I'm just going to encourage everybody, including myself, to take this thought of the calling and the goals to prayer, to see, you know, what God has to say about it. Any other comments before I switch to the next video? Okay. Let me share screen again. And we're going right here.
Move on to principle number 5. Accept your uni-presence. Yes, we're making up words here. As Christians, we believe that God is omnipresent. He's everywhere all the time. But for 33 years in Jesus Christ, who is fully God and fully man, Jesus willingly traded his godly omnipresence to experience the same unipresence that you and I face today. Jesus confined himself to one physical place at a time. Now, today, we act like we somehow could be in more than one place, at least mentally at a time, if not physically. And this is certifiably crazy. If Jesus couldn't be in more than one place at a time, neither can we. Now listen, there are lots of enemies in our fight for focus, in our fight to do deep work at the office and deep work at home and cultivating relationships. But I would argue the number one enemy attacking our ability to be uni-present are incoming messages. Emails pinging our phone, text message, social media DMs. It's analogous to if the mailman started coming to your house, not one time a day, but 150 times a day. But the mailman didn't stay at the curb. He got out of his car, came to your door, rang the doorbell, and you got up from whatever you were doing, answered the door, took the envelope. Maybe you open the message, maybe you don't, but at a minimum, you steal a glance at who it's from. If we did that with physical mail, we would all agree that you were certifiably crazy. But this is exactly what we're all doing with emails and text messages. And this is killing our ability to be uni-present with the people and work in our lives. So how do we solve this problem? Let me give you one hyper practical practice. I would argue it might be one of the most life-changing in this entire series. Here's the practice. Take control over when you check your messages. Don't let the mailman decide when you're gonna check your messages. You sit in the driver's seat. So how do you do this? 3 quick steps. Number 1, you choose ahead of time when you're gonna check emails and text messages every single day. And it doesn't matter when, and it doesn't even matter how many times you check your messages. What matters is that you dictate when that's gonna happen. It could be 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. It could be 10 times a day if you're in sales or customer service. The point is you dictate when that's gonna happen. Step 2, make a list of VIPs in your life who can have access to you outside of those predetermined times. Personally, my VIP list includes my wife, my assistant, my kids' school. It's pretty much it. Maybe a few close friends from time to time. What you do, make that list of VIPs and add them to your favorites list if you're an iPhone user, or your people list if you're an Android user, so that when you turn your phone on Do Not Disturb, calls from those people alone, not text messages or emails, are the only thing that are gonna distract you from whatever you're focused on in the moment. All right, step 3. After you've chosen when you're gonna check your messages and made a list of VIPs, the last step is you've gotta go to your VIPs and proactively set expectations about your response time. Send them an email, a text message, something along these lines. Hey guys, listen, in an effort to better serve you and my work, in an effort to be more focused at the office and at home, from now on, I'm only checking emails and text messages at X, Y, and Z times. However, because you're a VIP in my life, or whatever term you want to use, if you call me, not email, not text, but if you call my cell outside of those times, I'm gonna answer every single time that I can. I've coached more than 1,000 people through those 3 steps over the last couple years, and not one of them has reported missing something that was truly urgent, and all of them report doing their work crazy fast and with a heck of a lot less anxiety. You can too if you put that practice into play today. Okay, so in this session, we've talked about principle number 4, prioritizing your yeses, and principle 5, accepting your uni-presence. I've given you guys a couple of practices. In my book, Redeeming Your Time, there's a lot more practices to help you walk the way Jesus walked in our modern context. In our next session, we're gonna round out these 7 principles, talking about how we need to embrace productive rest and eliminate all hurry. I'll see you there.
What did y'all think about the comment that if Jesus, and I think it's kind of fascinating when I think of what, there's so many studies I've done that talk about what Jesus stepped into by taking on humanity and the limitations that he assumed by taking on humanity, and that he couldn't be in more place. You know, he gave up his omnipresence to be unipresent. And if he couldn't be in more place than one, why should we presume to be at the same time? Thoughts about that? What'd you say, David?
And the analogy of the mailman coming to the door multiple times a day. That one really struck me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so one of the things I think, you know, it talks about trying to be in more than one place at once, and we know we can't physically do that. But for me, what came up before we get to the mailman analogy was multitasking. Oh, and even with the mailman analogy, how many times have you been, and I get annoyed when people do it to me and then I end up doing it to people. You're talking to somebody and their phone beeps and then they're all of a sudden, they're looking at their phone. And they're like, yeah, I'm listening. And it's the whole concept of multitasking.
And you really cannot multitask. You can only do one thing at a time. You may be able to switch back and forth fairly quickly, but you really only can focus on one thing at a time. Unless you're a mother.
So true.
And there are things that you can do. You can wash dishes and talk to a child at the same time.
Something
That's
I'm
true.
fond of doing to people who apologize to me for not answering an email within, you know, an hour. You know, I always type back, well, email is, you know, it's not supposed to be concurrent. It's I feel like a speedy response to an email is days. And unless you're in a particular business relationship with a service level agreement that says you should be looking at your email and respond to me. I've been in IT for 30 years. Email is you should not expect a response. If you need an immediate response, call me.
Exactly.
Let's go ahead.
In my context, if students have a very high expectation for an immediate response, so that's just, so it's interesting because, you know, I try to manage them with boundaries, but then there's just that constant inflow of attention. You know, it's like attend to me here, attend to me there. If it's on Teams or chats or my phone chat, you know, or texts or email, or people just stop by, you know, it's just hard to set and then also respect and maintain that kind of boundary.
What did you guys think about his suggestion about, like, do you feel like the biggest, let me ask that first, who feels like that is the biggest thing that keeps you from focusing is texts and emails?
See and respond. I'll break away when the email pings just to see what that is. I don't get many texts, but emails is my kryptonite. And the idea that, you know, even if I don't tell people I'm not going to respond, email by its very nature is not an urgent thing. I'd probably be wise to shut down the email and check it, open it up and check it on an hourly basis or every other hour or something along that line, just to avoid that distraction.
So do we agree that's kind of the biggest area where we can get distracted?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I have tried where I'm only going to look at email if I'm sitting at a computer and not, constantly on my smartphone, but that's what seems to happen. And I really liked his tips about, the 3 steps and creating that VIP list, and then having an expectation with them about when you will, anyway, I'm going to try that.
Oh, good.
I think it also depends on what kind of expectations are set on you. Because I think in talking with people who are still teaching, one of the things that I've heard is that there are all kinds of expectations from the administration that says if you're a teacher, you have to respond, to your students by a certain amount of time. You have to respond to parents. You have to provide them with this. You have to provide them with that. And there's a question in part of who's responsible for keeping up with somebody's stuff. Is it you to keep track of everybody that you're working with, or is in part is growing up taking responsibility for what you're responsible for yourself? And so I just think, depending on where you are in terms of what your job is, there are people who can fault you for things that are, from my perspective, unreasonable to expect, and would go against being able to follow his plan about setting up certain times. So that I think people, he says that he is writing for Jesus in context of the current time, and I'd say it's also it has to be in the context of who is hiring somebody and what kind of job they have, that they're different expectations and different requirements. And he sounds like he's a little more in control of his life in terms of being able to kind of manage people as opposed to being managed.
Runs his own company, so
Yeah.
he can do that.
One thing that I used to do at my work, back in the olden days, they would tell us we should multitask, which, then they found out that really wasn't an efficient way of doing things. And so I would put a message on my emails, when they would come in, it would say, "Thank you, I've received your email. I'm working on a special project. If you need my immediate attention, please please call me. If there's something that you need an answer to immediately, otherwise I'll get back to you in, so much time tomorrow, whatever, so that I could focus on what I was working on." And so that seemed to work. That was an effective way for me to do that when I was in a work environment, and my job allowed that. So.
Mm-hmm.
So Mary, that's a great point. So I think that if we kind of take his message up a level, it's about setting boundaries and communicating expectations. And again, those are, things that we can take into prayer about, are what boundaries do we need to set to be better focused on the big audacious goals, the calling that God has for us. And then how do we need to communicate those expectations to those that we care about, so that they know. Mm-hmm. And like one example I had when my daughters were in college, and anytime they called me, if I was in a work meeting or a one-on-one with my employee, whatever I was in, I would say, "Let me just make sure they're not dead," which I knew they weren't, because they were calling me. But they would call me and I would say, "Are you dead?" And they would say, "No, I'm fine." I would be like, "Okay, I'll call you back."
Cute.
So, but I think his point is, we can't multitask. We know that, except when you're washing dishes or unloading the dishwasher. I agree with you there, Carol. but we can't. And so we need to be able to set boundaries for our time so that we can focus on where God's calling us. And then we need to communicate expectations.
I'll just say, I was just thinking about, the boundaries, and I work in an environment where I've got all kinds of people texting me, chatting me, I don't know, emailing me, and it's just crazy all day long. But when I'm not there, I'm on vacation or whatever, I do the same like out of office thing. So people know that when I'm out, this is my personal time, and I'm going to focus on me and what's important. So, but yeah, it's a struggle, but I really work to make sure every time I'm off, even for a day, that, maybe I might sneak in and look at something, but I'm not going to respond. I'm going to try to, if I'm off, I'm spending time with my family, and that's what I'm going to focus on.
That's a great way to end it. And so, while these are practical things that we're talking about, I think every one of them can be taken to prayer to ask God what that would look like in your life. And look at that big, pretty doggy. So let's go to prayers really quick. So David, what are we praying for for you, with your mom? And
Once you kill the recording,
oh,
Full
yes, thank
recording.
you. Sorry about that.